You're listening to the Travis Makes Money podcast.
Hey, what's going on, money makers? Welcome back to the Travis Makes Money podcast, where it's our mission to help you make more money this year. Today on the show, we're going to be talking about actually quite a few things, from side hustles to full-time entrepreneurship with my new friend, Scott Ritzheimer. Scott's helped start nearly 20,000 new businesses and nonprofits, and with his business partner started and led their multi-million-dollar business through an exceptional and extended growth phase over 10 years of double-digit annual growth, which is insane, all before he turned 35. Today, he helps founders and CEOs identify and implement the one essential strategy they need right now to get them on the fast track to predictable success, and has just released his new book, The Founder's Evolution: Conquering the Journey Every Founder Must Face. So if you are a full-time entrepreneur, or if you are considering a path into potentially getting into becoming a full-time entrepreneur, then you're definitely going to enjoy this conversation today with Scott. But first, before we get into all that, if you're tuning in and you're wondering how I go about building the relationships with some of the amazing people that I have on this show or on my other show, Travis Makes Friends, it's actually ironically been through the podcast itself that I've been able to grow a significant network from scratch, just through the actual podcast. And then in addition to that, the podcast also creates more content for my social media, helps me build an audience, grow a brand, sharpen expertise. And then it actually pays me like sponsorship dollars to do all of those things, which is pretty cool too. So if you're already running a 7, 8, or 9-figure business, you're curious if a podcast would be a good thing for you to add into your lineup, and you're looking for somebody to help you do that, travischappell.com/coaching. I'm taking 1 or 2 one-on-one coaching clients for a limited time. So if you are interested in that, travischappell.com/coaching, there's a quick application. We'll jump on a call, see if we might be a good fit to get your podcast out into the world. Now, without further ado, Scott Ritzheimer, what's up, man? Welcome to the show.
Travis, thanks for having me on. I always get this moment of just excitement and energy because it was actually a podcast that totally changed the course and trajectory of my life. You kind of get the highlight reel in the intro there, but it was a simple podcast like the one we're going to record here today that actually made all that possible. And so my hope is someone listening, we can do that same thing for them today.
Yeah. What podcast was that for you?
It was, it's gone through a rebrand. And so I think it's called Business Made Simple now, but it was Donald Miller back in the day. And he had a gentleman on with a funny Irish accent who's now a dear friend of mine, so I can say that. His name's Les McEwen. And they talk through different stages that businesses go through. And it totally, I always call Les like the Morpheus of the business world, because once you hear his model as from an organizational development standpoint, you can't unsee it. You know, it just changes the way you see the world around you.
That's fantastic, dude. It's funny. I literally just had Donald Miller back on the show like last week in person in Nashville. So this stuff is all top of mind for me right now, again, because I'm reading through his 2.0 version of building a story brand right now. It was like in preparation for that interview, and I've just kept reading it because it's still really good, you know? But yeah, it's funny that you're full circle here, learning on a podcast and then turning around teaching on a podcast. And that's very, very similar how it was for me. It was like podcasts helped me change basically everything about who I was. And so I was like, oh, this seems like a cool thing to do. So I appreciate you taking the time to do this then, Scott. Let's go back in time to around that time then. What were you doing where a podcast episode was putting you in a position to change your life from that point forward?
Yeah, I was questioning whether I wanted to be an entrepreneur anymore. I mean, if I'm honest, I was wrestling with a question that I found is nearly universal in the entrepreneurial journey, and that is this it? Is this really why I risked everything to start this business? Is this really why I've worked all these hours? Is this really what it means to lead a multi-million-dollar business? You know, it's like there's this moment, and it comes at different times for different folks, but we all reach this point where we realize that businesses get bigger, right, when they succeed, but they don't inherently get better.
Yeah.
And so for over a decade, I grew my business thinking that if I could get to X number, or this milestone, or that statistic, or this many people, or that much in revenue, or this much in profit, I would arrive in some way, shape, or form, that I would be successful, that I would fill in the blank. There's so many different motivations. And every time I reached one of those milestones, there's just there was nothing. It was nothing different on the other side. It looked exactly the same. I like it. I'm not a long distance runner. It's just there's lots of things in life. Long distance running is not one of them. And so I found that out when I decided to run a half marathon here in Atlanta. And I remember I took the MARTA, the train in Atlanta, down so I wouldn't have to find parking down there, and thought that would be a great idea. So I'm running this race. Atlanta's a little hilly. It's not the most in the world, but there's a couple decent hills on the route. And I got to mile 10 and I hated everything. Like I hated the street under my feet. I hated my feet. I hated everything. Like I hated the 70-year-old lady who was passing me. Just every bit of it. It's like, why do people do that? Well, I paid for this, right? Just furious. So, and I still have 3.1 miles left or whatever it is. And so just fighting and fighting. And a lot of founders are in that, like they're just fighting every day. They don't actually love what they do anymore. They're just fighting to get to some finish line. And like me, they get to the finish line and I realized right when I crossed it, that I had another mile and a half I had to go to get to the MARTA station. My race wasn't over yet, even though I'd crossed the finish line. Yeah. And I remember looking up and there were people all over the place and, they're cheering and whatever. And I just remember thinking to myself, is this it? Like I just did I trained all those weeks. I ran all those miles. I spent this entire morning to do this. And I never did it again. But for founders, we bump into a similar problem. And that's where I was, to answer your question. That's a really long answer. Sorry. But I was wondering, is this it? Like, is this really as good as it gets?
Yeah. Yeah. And the answer was no, it's not. You can do it better.
Yeah. The answer is no, it's not even close. And in fact, in whichever way you go, it gets better, right? You just have to pick. And so what was happening was I was pretty good at the path behind me, right? Like we had learned those lessons. I knew what that route looked like. I had a map of my rear view mirror. I could tell you how to succeed up to that point. Around this time, we were a $7 million company, somewhere in that range. And what I didn't know was what was ahead of me, right? And so when I looked in the rearview mirror and I looked at all the success we had and how the more success we had, it just the problems scaled faster than the profits did, right? Sure. And so I'm looking in my rearview mirror and I'm trying to project what's forward, and it just like honestly, it's like it's just going to get worse. Like I see how this goes. Yes, it'll look more successful from the outside. Yeah, it'd probably make for a great podcast intro, but I'm dying inside every day. And why would I bend over backwards to create more success when it just creates more of this feeling? And what that podcast started for me at an organizational level, which I then was able to, several years later, map to this individual journey that we go on, was to recognize that feeling is just a normal stage in the process. All that frustration that I was having wasn't because I had done something wrong. It was because I had done the right things that led me to that point. But what it meant was I had to change. I had to move from being the founder, the answer man, the one who had it all figured out, to being the CEO, to creating a team that could make decisions instead of doing it myself, to building systems and processes and structures that could succeed whether I was in the building or not. And when I made that shift, and the things that are necessary to make that shift, it created an enormous transformation inside the organization. We tripled our bottom line in a year. It created an enormous transformation in my own life in that I one, discovered what I loved doing, which was that. And two, I realized how joyful being a CEO can actually be, right? You don't have to be founder to have joy. There's a lot of founders, at least I know for me, I kind of pushed off this, hey, I don't know if I want to be a CEO. I don't want some stuffy, like whatever. I like being founder. What I didn't realize was the freedom that I was letting go of just to hang on to that card.
What are the couple of the biggest transition points when you're moving from founder to CEO? Like where's the biggest resistance built up?
The biggest resistance is that it's really, really not about you anymore. And if you look at the trajectory that happens, there are several stages where it's less and less about you. But at this point, it's not about, I liken it in the book, I compare it to different positions, if you will, in a sports team, sports hierarchy. And there are earlier stages where you're the star player on the field, and then you're captain on the field. And then this transition we're talking about now is actually moving from being like a coach on the sideline, there at the ground level, calling all the plays, calling all the shots, telling people what to do, high fives and attaboys and everything like that as well. But moving from that, I got to call every play mode to moving to the GM in the box, right? GM in the box, you're not thinking about winning games. In fact, GM doesn't have to be there for the team to win a game, right? What they're thinking about is how do we win seasons and how do we build dynasties? How do we staff the right team? And so I would say the biggest single shift is that you have to stop making what I call policy decisions. This is what we're going to do. And start making people decisions. I need you to figure out which way we need to go.
Why is that so difficult for founders?
Because you've not developed that skill at all over that time, right? When you look at just the normal trajectory, what do you have to do to succeed as an entrepreneur? I mean, start out in the very beginning. You're out there. You've got to know what to do with your time. And for a lot of folks, especially those who are starting side hustle, you don't have a whole lot of it, right? And you don't have a whole lot of resources in terms of money or relationships or anything like that. It's all limited. So what is refined very, very quickly, at least in those who succeed, is how to make really great decisions really fast, right? In the moment, right? And so for years, we dial in that skill set and we make bigger and more meaningful and more important decisions, but we're the one making those decisions. And so what we don't develop is the skill of translating that to other people. What we don't develop is the skill of being able to assess and understand who's worthy of that type of responsibility, right? Yeah. And so a common symptom is we're trying to act like CEO in this stage, but to be chief executive, you have to have other executives, right? Otherwise, you're not the chief executive, you're just the executive. And so what this looks like for a lot of folks is they have great people around them that are to some extent leaders in their own right. But if you ask a founder at that stage, do you have executives that are working for you? Folks that know how to scale this business, that you could trust to 10x it from where we are in the next few years? Overwhelmingly, they'll say no, right? Now, these are great people, wonderful people, sweat equity galore. We built the business on their backs, right? Like, oftentimes they're like godfather to our children. So don't get me wrong, like wonderful people, but they're not the type of leaders that we need to really scale a business. And intuitively, we know that. But relationally, we don't want to deal with it. And from a skills perspective, we don't actually know, even though we know we don't have it yet, we don't know how to go find it. And so we've got to develop the skill. We have to have the difficult conversations, and we've got to surround ourselves with the right team.
And now, since you've been doing a lot of this work, Scott, we kind of glazed over in the bio, but I want to bring it back to that kind of full circle here. It says you helped start nearly 20,000 new businesses and nonprofits. Tell me about that.
Yeah, it's a weird number, and I had to pinch myself the first couple times when I actually sat down to calculate it, because you do that, you don't take time to measure it. It's like we were just going. Yeah. And it was in the nonprofit and business world, more nonprofits at the start, more businesses at the end. And a big part of what we were doing was helping organizations launch from the ground up. So we were oftentimes the we'd call it the second call, They'd like, hey, I'm going to start a business, or I'm going to start a church, or I'm going to start a nonprofit, or whatever it may be. They'd call their husband or wife, and then they'd be like, okay, how are you going to do that? And they'd realize I have no idea, so they would call us. And so that was there helping me and my team. We were launching by the end of it around 1,500, almost 2,000 organizations a year. And I mean, you see something like that happen at that scale that many times. You work with that many founders, and you start to see patterns emerge. And so I saw a lot succeed. Which some of the fastest growing nonprofits and businesses in the country we had helped get from the off the ground floor, and I saw a lot fail as well. We saw a whole lot fail. I remember about 5 years into that. We weren't doing that volume at the beginning, but 5 years in, we ran into this really weird problem, which was folks calling us saying, hey, it's not going to work. We need to close this thing down. How do we do that? And that rattles you a little bit. It's like, whoa, wait, hold on a second. Especially when it's not the ones that you thought, right? Like some people, maybe, that doesn't matter. But it got me thinking, like, why, right? Why is it that some succeed and others don't? Why is it that some stall out and others don't? And then when it really hit home was when I started seeing some of the same patterns in my own life, right? My own leadership as a founder. That's what really set me on the path to figuring out, what is this journey that we're all on? Is it the same? Is it different? And fortunately, yes, there are different variables and there's different timelines, but the broad strokes are the same for everybody. There's a very, very predictable path that folks follow from pre-launch all the way to post-exit.
So that's kind of the reason for the book now.
Yeah. That's exactly right. And so what happened and why it made it to book form was I was using a lot of Les McKeown's work. It's called Predictable Success. Highly recommend it. It's unbelievable for anyone who wants to scale their business or nonprofit. Again, I was seeing some folks succeed and others weren't. And they were following the same things. And those who were succeeding were doing, it was similar to what I had. They were tripling their bottom line in a year. They were doubling revenue in a year. Just these fantastic transformational results. And then others, it was just kind of the same. I'd go back to them a year later and they were kind of doing the same thing, just more work. And I was like, what's the common thing here? What's going on? And I realized the number one differentiator, when you do the right things, mind you, right? Because both groups were doing the right tactics to scale a business. Some of them were scaling and some weren't. The thing that was missing in those that didn't was they didn't understand how they had to evolve as founder. And so they hadn't made the leap that they needed to lead their business into a more scalable, sustainable model. And because of that, they were undermining
the constraint, essentially.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Yeah. So the Founder's Evolution is kind of a book that's written for a founder that maybe is potentially struggling from moving, like from transitioning from this seat to this seat to this seat as like alongside of the business.
Yeah. So, for example, I'll ask you this. What do you think, what's the title that's on everyone's business card, if they make a business card anymore? But what's like, before they even start, what's the title say?
I got to think CEO.
Yeah, right. Founder and CEO, vice president, or president and CEO, it does something in CEO. But the reality of it is, when you look at what a CEO does, right? If you were to say, hey, I'm going to go out and hire a CEO, and you look at what that person does day one of their business, they look nothing alike. Yeah. You don't actually start acting like a CEO, or at least you shouldn't really start acting like a CEO until stage 5 of the process. That means there are 5 meaningful stages that you have to go through to get there. There are 5 distinct challenges you have to face to do that. There are 5 very, very different strategies for success. And so the problem, though, is that they're all invisible. Like, when did those stages happen? Right? Like, what are the demarcation points? If you look at the path of an employee who's growing in leadership, they actually have the same stages. It's the same set of 7 stages that they experience. But the advantage that an employee has over a founder is that there's some external fact that reveals that the stage has changed. So that sounds super nebulous. Let me talk about what I mean by that.
Sure.
You start your journey, low man on the totem pole, you're an individual contributor, right? How do you create success? By just crushing it, getting a ton done, by being a star player. It's about what you can get done yourself. Well, what happens is when we see someone crushing it as a star player, getting a ton done, we think, hey, they're ready for more. We want to promote them. Maybe we can get other people to get a ton done. And so we promote them to a frontline manager, supervisor, something like that. And that's actually a really hard transition for just about everybody to make. To go from succeeding as an individual contributor to succeeding as what I call captain on the field. There's an entire industry in coaching for employees on how to do that. Yeah. But at least as an employee, there's a title change that comes with that. There's a responsibility shift that's validated from the outside, right? So it makes sense that it's hard because you have a different role. When does that same transition happen for a founder? Is it when you hire your first person or your 15th or your 5th? Like when do you stop being individual contributor founder and start being captain on the field founder? Unless you have a map, it's very difficult to know.
100%, 100%. So where's the best place that you want people to go to pick up a copy of this book, Scott? Is there a specific place, like a website or a specific landing page or something like
Yeah,
that?
we've made it free for everyone in a download format. So you can go to scalearchitects.com/founders and get a copy of the full book for free there. And it's got all 7 stages, again, from pre-launch to post-exit. And then most importantly, it boils each stage down to here are the couple of things that you need to work on, right? Which when you're listening to podcasts, it's like, okay, I got another set of things that I have to work on. But what's different about this is once you understand what the 2 or 3 things are that you have to do, it's not hard to understand. That means there's 20 or 30 things that you don't actually have to do in this stage. And so folks who have read the book and written back, on average, have been saving somewhere 9, 10, 15 hours every week on things that they thought that they were supposed to be doing as founder at that stage, but didn't actually have to do.
Love it, man. Scalearchitects with an S.com.
Yes.
Go pick up a copy for free, guys. It's free. Even if he was charging for it, you should buy it. So the fact that it's free is even better. So scalearchitects.com, go pick up a copy of The Founder's Evolution from Scott Ritzheimer. I'm sure you will not regret that. Scott, we're going to move into the last segment here, and then we'll get you out of here. Real quick questions, some quick random answers. You ready?
Let's do it.
What profession other than your own do you think that it would be fun to master?
I would love to get into something to do with sports science. And I'm actually surprised at how much organizational science and sports science are starting to converge.
If you could sit on a park bench with somebody, past or present, and chat for an hour, who would it be?
Abraham Lincoln.
How do you like to consume information best? Books, audiobooks, blogs, podcasts, YouTube videos, newsletters?
I would say all of those things in audio form. So audiobooks, listening to podcasts, listening to YouTube videos, all of it.
What's a good book on making money?
What is a good book on making money? Buy Back Your Time is a good one. I've been on lately. I think it's fantastic.
What is your go-to pump-up song, Scott?
It's actually changed recently because of my kids. This is make me feel old, but my kids listen to Zayd Wolf, and it came on to like some list because they also use my iTunes, and it came on during a workout, and it was like awesome. So I would say probably Gladiator at the moment. It's really funny.
Scalearchitects.com. Go pick up a copy of Scott's book. Everybody else listening, tuning in, remember, money only solves your money problems. Then you're left with the problems that money can't solve, but it's easier to solve those problems with some money in the bank. So let's solve that problem first on the Travis Makes Money podcast. Thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you next time. Scott, thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks, Travis.